You know, the more you get into this, the more you understand what this really is. Because, you know, the thing that's important to understand is that often people look at what can be had through the practice of meditation is that you can have an altered experience. You know, you can get high, you can have an altered experience, right? But that, you know, that's okay if that's an attraction and so forth, but that's really not what the reality of it is. The reality of it is you are having an altered experience in your common everyday way of experiencing things. That's an altered experience, right? That's an altered experience because what you're perceiving to be reality is not real. Isn't that an altered experience? What you're perceiving to be who you are is not real. It's not who you actually are. That's an altered experience. So what we're talking about here is coming out of the dream, coming out of the altered experience and making contact with reality, making contact with the truth. What we're talking about here is what actually is, what is actually happening, who you actually are, what is actually real. And so it's a lot more realistic and a lot truer to say it's not about getting high, it's about getting real. It's about experiencing things as they are. And so I think that, you know, as you continue to learn about this and you continue to practice, there should be a time when this practice starts to become a way of life. There should be a time when this practice, when you're clear enough about the practice and you're clear enough about what this is all about, that it becomes a way of life, that your life is a practice, not just meditation, your life is a practice. And you begin to intentionally and consciously look for the opportunities to bring this practice into play. And you begin to see the times in your life where you are triggered and you're emotionally upset and you're distraught and you're lost in thought, or you're facing a crisis, right? Or you're facing some of the things that are inevitable in life, that those are opportunities for practice. That's the translation. It turns into seeing it that's seeing it that way. I was watching an interview of Stan Grof, psychiatrist, this morning, and he's 89 years old now. He's one of the first psychiatrists to experiment with LSD. And in Europe, when he was a young psychiatrist and LSD was first discovered, it wasn't illegal yet because nobody really knew much about it. And it just so happened that the practitioners that he was involved with had access to it and started to experiment with it and started to use it in treating people and started to experience the incredible results that were being produced. And also took it themselves to experience what happens when you use a psychedelic substance. And I can tell you that from my own experience that what happens when you use a psychedelic substance is the filtering process that goes on in the brain gets dampened down. And what that means is that the personality gets dampened down. The personality, the operation of the mind and the brain and the thought process to generate this idea of who you are and to generate the perception that you're having of the world that system gets damped down. And when it gets damped down, what happens is you start to actually be seeing things as they actually are. You start to experience yourself as you actually are. Now, for somebody that doesn't have any understanding of any of that, they would say, I got high, right? I got high. What do they mean by that? Well, they mean that they have this, and you can read descriptions of people who had no understanding of these experiences from a traditional spiritual context, right? They will say, oh, well, I experienced total freedom. I experienced that I was having more fun being alive than I ever experienced. I was feeling excitement. I was feeling energetic. I was feeling, some people talk about, I was feeling love, a kind of love that I never experienced before. I was experiencing being one with everything that was going on around me. These are the typical things that people talked about that experience psychedelic experiences. Right? And so, and it's interesting because Stan Grof, what happened was when psychedelic drugs became illegal, he was very upset and disturbed because he saw the potential that they had. And of course, the way government protects us all from one another and from everything that the government determines is a threat to us is to control everything, right? That's what it's all about. Control is the solution to everything. Let's control things, right? Let's control what people say. Let's control what people do. Let's control what people eat. Let's control what substances they take. You know, let's control their behavior. And it's just driving people crazier. It's driving people crazier. I mean, look at the news. It's driving people crazier. So he was very upset when they made it illegal. And at that time, as he shared in this interview, which was just today, that at that time, the psychiatrists that were involved with the utilization or the use of it either went underground and continued to use it, you know, because they felt that the difference it made in what it could do for people compared to the conventional approaches that they had been trained in, they didn't want to go back and do that stuff anymore because it was so limited. And then other people just obeyed the law and went back and did the traditional way of doing psychotherapy and psychiatry. But what he did was he started to investigate, is there another way to experience this, right? And he came up with a thing called holotropic breathwork. And I highly recommend that you look into that, right? He discovered that there is a way of using the breath and increasing the rapidity of breathing and working with the body that you could get access to the same kinds of experiences that people were having with psychedelics without the drug, right? So that's, and now we have this revolution that's occurring now, because just like marijuana, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, it was, you know, it was considered dangerous. It was a dangerous drug, right? And so we needed to be protected from it. But then gradually over time, as more and more people used it, it started to change into, oh, now it has a medical use. That's an interesting thing. What was a dangerous drug now is medicine, right? In the ancient civilizations, that's the way it was used from the very beginning, as well as psychedelics, right? Because psychedelics are found in nature, in mushrooms and other kinds of things, right? So what's happening now is because so many people used marijuana and it's so common, and the benefits of its use are so common, and it's understood now not to be dangerous. It's less dangerous than alcohol, that's a fact, right? So now it's changing into becoming legal. The same thing is happening with psychedelics. So many people have used psychedelics over the last 3 or 4 decades, and the experiences they had were so valuable and so useful, and those things got written about, that now the Federal Drug Administration is in the final stage of making MDMA, which is a strong drug that has an effect on the brain and opens up experience, making it legal for treatment and psychotherapy. You know, that's very close to happening. I predict that in the future, it's hard to say when, but I predict in the future that psychedelics will become a commonly used substance in working with people to deal with addiction, depression, anxiety, and all the things that people go to psychotherapy about, because the evidence is starting to accumulate that it has a very powerful effect and can profoundly change the experience that people are having. And it's interesting, I was thinking about this today, maybe the acceptance and the use of psychedelic substances and other kinds of substances that change the brain dramatically and immediately, right? Maybe this will end up being the thing that has human beings change, that has humanity change in a significant enough way globally, right, that we start to behave like we're sane. and we stop destroying the environment and stop killing one another and stop understanding that there is a possible way of being in the world together where we can support life and we can enjoy our existence together. Maybe that, wouldn't it be interesting if that then becomes part of the final solution to the insanity and the madness that humanity has been expressing, for so long now? That would be an interesting thing. That's right. That's an important thing to understand about these things, that when you have these experiences, what we're understanding more is that when you have these experiences, you're making contact with reality. You're experiencing what it feels like to make contact with reality. You're experiencing what it feels like to be out of your mind in a good way, right? To be out of the personality and out of the habit patterns and out of all of the constricting, contracted experience that people have of themselves and of their lives. And because they have that experience, look at for example, Ramdas, Richard Alpert's, who was called Ramdas after he went to India and got a guru. But it all started for him taking LSD at Harvard University, him and Timothy Leary, right? And the experience they had with this changed their life so profoundly that they didn't care about anything else but finding out how to have this be a consistent experience. And in the case of Richard Alpert's, he ended up, because they actually started taking more of LSD with the idea that maybe if we take enough of this, we can stay in the experience, it won't go away. But they found out that it didn't work, that there was a tolerance effect and it was less and less powerful. And so they gave up on that, and then they split company, and Timothy Leary just said, everybody should just keep taking LSD. And Richard Alpert's went to India because he heard that there were gurus there that were experiencing this state naturally. And the famous book that he wrote back I think it was in the 60s or early 70s, called Be Here Now, was his sharing his experience of going to India and finding this guru that he gave a huge dose of LSD to. The guru actually asked him for the medicine. He actually knew that he had it and asked him for the medicine and took a huge dose of LSD. And Richard Alpert stayed with him, and the next day asked him, what happened? And he said it gave him a headache. For most people, that would have caused them to go into a full-blown, dramatic, intense experience. So what does that say, And then he stayed and became a student of this teacher, this guru, and spent the rest of his life practicing meditation, writing books about this state of being that is possible for all of us. That became something that he dedicated the rest of his life to. Yeah, so things are changing as far as these things about consciousness and about the use of these things. Microdosing is a new thing. Have you heard of that? Microdosing? Microdosing is now, there's been a lot of research done on it, and people are reporting very dramatic changes occurring in mood and emotional experience by microdosing. And microdosing is taking a very small fraction of the dose that would cause you to have the full-blown trip or the full-blown experience, just taking a very small fraction of that over time, and people are reporting the difference it makes. But the thing about this that's interesting is that this is not new to a lot of indigenous people in South America and other places in the world. They've been microdosing for hundreds of years. They would chew on cocaine leaves when they were working as a way of, maintaining a positive experience of themselves and their life while they're doing this tedious work, right? So it's not new. It's new to the developed countries and so forth, but it's another thing that's happening that's going to open up a whole different possibility. And the thing about it is, I'm not suggesting that over time in the future everybody's going to be taking LSD all the time or taking psychoactive drugs or psychedelic drugs. I'm suggesting that the experiences that these things make possible for people, that give them a direct experience of what we talk about here as a possibility, right? That having had that direct experience, it really makes it really makes it clear to you what's possible, and it really gives you a sense of what it feels like to have that experience, and it really motivates you to do what you need to do and can do to actually transform your life in such a way where that becomes a natural, constant way that you're experiencing yourself. That's what I think is the ultimate outcome. You know, that it's just an opportunity for people. Even here, what people say that come to spiritual teachings and come to listen to the people that are out there talking about non-duality and all these days, what do they say? I understand what you're saying. I have moments where I think I actually see it, right? But I'm not actually experiencing it with any kind of consistency. I'm not actually experiencing it to the extent that I sense is the possibility here, right? So that's what people are saying, and these psychedelic experiences are opportunities for people to actually have the experience temporarily. But the experience that they're having temporarily is an experience that we know through teachings and practices is an experience that can be a consistent experience. That you can come out of the altered state and be in a natural, consistent experience that is peaceful, that is interesting, that is fulfilling, that is pleasurable. That's the possibility of life. First of all, you know, I have been a student of Werner Erhard for many years. You know, I've met Werner Erhard. I have done his work in the prisons. You know, I've actually led the forum. I've led the S training in the prisons with his permission. So I have a very deep understanding of how all that material works, right? And the thing that you have to understand about that is that what Werner Erhard did when he put that together, right? What he was attempting to do was to create an experience for people that they would have a sense of what it would be like to have what they call in Zen a satori experience. In other words, an awakening experience, right? So it was based on Zen, you know, and he had studied Zen, and he had been with Zen masters, and he had studied with Swami Muktananda and different religious leaders and so forth, Tibetan masters. And so he put this together. He had an experience of awakening himself, right, through being interested in mind dynamics and learning more about how the mind works and about consciousness. One day he was driving across the Golden Gate Bridge to work, and he had an awakening experience, right, where he saw things as they were, right? And then he put this together, these different things that he came up with, that he thought if he could put all this together in some kind of format, that it might produce that result for people. And he started out by doing it in the living room of a friend's house with just a few people. And they had this awakening experience. And so they asked him to do it with more people, and it continued to grow until the S training came into practice. So what happens, right? What happens is through time and through interacting with the leader, the trainer, right? And since having done it, I'm sure you experienced that the trainer is very powerful a very powerful state of being in the room, right? So they're interacting with somebody who's in touch with reality, and that person's reflecting back to them how crazy they are, right? That's what happens over the 60 hours. People get up and they talk crazy, and he exposes the insanity, right? And then as time goes on, everybody in the room starts to see the difference between being crazy and sane. And there's this group experience of consciousness that starts to occur in the room. So when you get up and you share your craziness, right, and that energy goes out, and it's heard and understood and accepted by a group that's already generating a state of being, right? There's this release. This is what people talk about when they say they experience enlightenment, and they say it's bliss, right? It's a release of this contraction. That's what happens. A release of this energy, this emotional energy that's been suppressed and repressed, and it's let go of now. And when it's let go of, there's more of an opportunity to be in an expanded state of consciousness and to experience what it's like to be in a natural, conscious, awake state.
But I feel like I went through hell to get
Well, that's because it takes a lot of different aspects of the experience to get you out of your mind, to get you out of your ordinary habitual way of being. And so in that case, there was confrontation, right?
Oh, sure.
Heavy confrontation. They were very strict agreements to be kept about when you would eat, how long you would sleep, you know, all of these things, right, that weaken the mind's ability to stay in control. That's basically what happens, right? And then there's an appeal to you in terms of your understanding what it looks like to be sane and be in touch with reality the way it is. And then, as you recall, on the very last day, they had this thing called getting it, right? Do you remember what it was that you got?
I don't recall.
It's like nothing, right?
Yeah. After all of this stuff and this buildup, you know, like we're going somewhere here, right? We're going somewhere here. We're going to have this really altered state experience, right? And then on the last day, when the trainer says, when there's maybe 3 or 4 hours left of the 60 hours, the trainer says, okay, now we're going to have the getting it experience. Is everybody ready to get it? So everybody's like, oh, wow, you know, he's going to say the thing. He's going to say the thing that's going to have us all experience that we're enlightened, right? And he says, here's what there is to get. There's nothing to get. And given the intensity of the preparation for all this and the buildup of all the energy, right, and the buildup of all the expectations, there's a tremendous release in terms of basically saying to people, this is it. There's no hidden meanings. There's no special place. There is no altered state. This is it the way it is. But by then they can experience the it that is not the insane interpretation of everything. Do you see? So getting nothing is getting everything. And that's the experience that people
Right,
had.
I remember the last day they kept repeating, this is it, this is it.
That's right.
So, but for me, the it was that one day of real enlightenment almost. You know, that day of awakening.
Yeah, and so the value of it is that if you had that experience, now you have something realer than a conceptual understanding.
Right.
But it's not going to come back unless you do the work necessary. Okay, have a good evening.